Apollo 11 and crew today broke out of the moon's dominant pull and entered the gravitational field of Earth. A 10-second blast of their engine lined them up with their re-entry corridor. The Apollo 11 spacecraft will now gradually increase its speed until it slams into the Earth's atmosphere next Thursday morning. Speaking to about 2,000 foreign exchange students on the White House lawn today, President Nixon predicted that man will visit some other worlds with some form of life on them by the turn of the century.
I believe, and I'm sure that those in this audience who are so young and so full of life and so full of optimism will agree with me, in the year 2000, we will, on this earth, have visited new worlds where there will be a form of life. I know this will happen. And I want to tell you, as I look forward and dream about that future, as I'm sure you look forward to it and dream about it, this is the kind of a world I would like to see and the kind of exploration of that new world that I know all of Americans want. I hope that when the next great venture into space takes place, that it will be one in which Americans will be joined by representatives of other countries so that we can go to the new worlds together. And I realize that the kind of teamwork, the kind of scientific achievement, the kind of idealism that we saw in that space shot, that landing on the moon, if we could just bring all that to bear on the problems here on Earth, the problems of our environment, the problems of adequate food and adequate health and adequate shelter and progress, a fair share for everybody on this Earth. If that can be done, what a world we can create.
Britain's famed astronomer Sir Bernard Lovell said today that Apollo 11 clearly demonstrated American superiority in space and sharply increased the chances of American-Soviet space cooperation. Again today, Soviet scientists applauded the Apollo mission, but they offered no explanation of what happened to their Luna 15, which, according to the Jodrell Bank tracking station, slammed into the moon last night. Most Western scientists believe the Russian experiment was a failure. David?
Dr. Werner von Braun said he thought that in the future the landing on the moon would be compared to the time when some aquatic creature crawled up out of the sea and began to adapt itself to living on the land. While the three flyers are returning to Earth and to their recovery in the Pacific on Thursday, there are plans for parades with ticker tape and so on in New York, Chicago, and Los Angeles. Details later.
The Huntley Brinkley Report is produced by NBC News and brought to you in color by your Phillips 66 dealers from coast to coast. At Phillips 66, it's performance that counts.
You know what's nice about the new cars? They keep the air cleaner than the old ones did, especially when you use Phillips 66 gasolines and Trop Arctic motor oils, the anti-pollution team. Both have detergent additives that help keep your carburetor, pistons, PCV valve, and other engine parts clean while you drive. And because your engine stays cleaner, the air stays cleaner. The anti-pollution team, only from Phillips 66.
President Nixon badly wants the 10% surtax extended, and he called the leaders of Congress to a meeting at the White House today and told them that, again. He had there with him 4 present and former secretaries of the Treasury in impressive array to say they all agreed. Well, that puts members of Congress in a position of severe discomfort. On the one hand, the president says the tax is essential to the economic soundness of the country. On the other hand, congressmen are flooded now with letters from the public saying they're sick and tired of paying so much tax, getting so little for it, and seeing so much of it wasted. Today, the stock market had another fairly sharp loss. The Dow Jones Industrial Average declined about 12 points. An average share of common stock lost 66 cents. In Washington today, Defense Secretary Laird spoke to the American Legion Boys Nation and defended the spending on military hardware.
You know, this budget of the Department of Defense is sometimes under attack. I saw a listing that was used in the United States Senate, and perhaps this will come up in your debates during this week. But I saw this listing of various weapon systems on which we'd wasted billions of dollars. It listed various weapon programs that had been developed and manufactured over a period since World War II. And because these systems had been superseded by more modern systems, the charge was made that the money invested in these systems had been wasted. Well, it was wasted because they weren't used. And the reason that they weren't used is that we did not have a nuclear exchange. The reason that the money was wasted was because we had a credible deterrent and were able to see that a nuclear exchange did not occur since World War II. And so I say that I hope that every dollar that's invested in a weapon system today is a wasted dollar, because then our program to maintain peace and deter war will be an effective program.
Today, the Pentagon admitted it did have poison gas, nerve gas, stored on the Pacific island of Okinawa. Some of it escaped last month, and 24 people were affected. The Japanese government nearby was upset about it and asked the gas be removed. Today, the Pentagon said, yes, it was there, and it would be removed. Inside the United States, poisonous gases and chemicals are stored at numerous locations, including some not far from big American cities. Chet?
In Vietnam, communist troops staged hit-and-run attacks on Allied positions near Saigon and Da Nang, but there was no major break in the month-long lull in the fighting. General Earl Wheeler, chairman of the Joint Chiefs of Staff, returned to Washington today after 4 days in Vietnam. He was sent there by President Nixon to determine if the lull is significant or merely a prelude to a new communist offensive. Wheeler talked to newsmen after arriving at Andrews Air Force Base.
Well, historically, the North Vietnamese and the Viet Cong have operated in a cyclic fashion. That is, they have launched offensives. After they have been defeated, they've withdrawn into the remote areas of the country or into Cambodia or Laos or North Vietnam to refit, to bring their forces up to strength, to retrain, and so on. The assessment out there is that the next high point could very well come toward the end of this month or early in the month of August. The intelligence indicators, based upon the movement of their forces, the movement of their supplies, the captured documents, prisoner interrogations, and all that kind of thing, indicate that they are preparing for another series of attacks.
If you could put Tareyton's charcoal filter on the end of your cigarette, if you could put Tareyton's charcoal filter on your cigarette, well, anyway, if you could put Tareyton's charcoal filter on your cigarette, you'd have a better tasting cigarette. Of course, we can't guarantee it'd smoke as smooth as a Tareyton. If you want your cigarette to smoke as smooth as a Tareyton, better face it, it'll just have to be a Tareyton. To begin with, no other cigarette has Tareyton tobacco. And when that tobacco is smoothed by Tareyton's activated charcoal filter, it tastes even milder.
That's why us Tareyton smokers would rather fight than switch.
Tareyton, with the activated charcoal filter.
Senator Edward Kennedy today attended the funeral of Mary Jo Kopechne in Plymouth, Pennsylvania. It was his first public appearance since Miss Kopechne drowned last weekend when Kennedy's car went off a narrow bridge after a party near Martha's Vineyard, Massachusetts. Police said Kennedy waited 8 hours to report the accident, and he has been charged with leaving the scene of an accident. Until today, he had been in seclusion at his home in Hyannisport. Here are reports from 3 NBC News correspondents.
Mary Jo Kopechne left Plymouth, Pennsylvania with her family when she was a year old. When she died, her family brought her back to Plymouth to bury her in the place they considered home. The wake yesterday attracted many strangers, people who were curious. It also brought Mary Jo's mother from New Jersey. And from Washington, the girlfriends and roommates who had gone with Mary Jo to the weekend party on Martha's Vineyard. At dusk, her father came out to talk with newsmen about the death of his only daughter.
Sir, this is a difficult question, and with all respect, but are you satisfied with the results of an accidental drowning?
More than satisfied. Just satisfied, let's say.
Have you spoken with Senator Kennedy, sir?
Yes.
Tell us what he said.
He just said that he would wish it was him and not Mary Jo.
Senator Kennedy flew to Pennsylvania for the funeral with Mrs. Ethel Kennedy, the widow of Robert Kennedy, and his own wife, Joan. He wore a neck brace. His doctor said he suffered a slight concussion and minor neck injuries in the accident. Mary Jo, who would have been 29 years old on Saturday, was the Kopechne's only child.
Senator Kennedy.
Senator Kennedy arrived from the funeral about 2:30 this afternoon, landing at the Barnstable Airport here in Hyannis. With him in the green and white DC-3 were his wife Joan, Ethel Kennedy, and a number of aides. About 50 newsmen were waiting for Kennedy, trying to get his first statement since the incident.
Let's go, Dan.
Senator, will you have a statement to make for us, please?
This is the appropriate time.
Will you be making any statements at all
I
about...
said this isn't really, this is the day of the funeral, it's not at the appropriate time.
Can we expect an
Well, I will at an
explanation for you?
appropriate time.
No one connected with the Kennedy organization is talking about the party last Friday night, but in Edgartown, where the incident occurred, Chief of Police Dominic Arena says he has a witness who shortly before the incident saw a man and two women in an Oldsmobile at the intersection where Senator Kennedy made the wrong turn. Arena says he also has witnesses who can account for the senator's movements during the 8 hours between the death of Mary Jo Kopechne and when the senator reported it to the police. Now, Senator Kennedy is back in the Kennedy compound in seclusion. And when or if he will answer questions about the death of Mary Jo Kopechne is still unknown. This is Liz Trotta, NBC News, Hyannisport.
The cigarette industry offered today to stop all its advertising on radio and television by late next year if Congress allows it to advertise freely and without health warnings in other places, newspapers, magazines, billboards, and so on. Speaking for the industry was Joseph Coleman of Philip Morris before a Senate Commerce Subcommittee.
I have been authorized by each cigarette manufacturer for whom I speak to inform this committee that each company is prepared to agree to discontinue all advertising of cigarettes on television and radio in September 1970, when the major existing contractual arrangement will expire, provided that Congress enacts legislation which provides that an agreement to this effect shall not be deemed illegal under the antitrust laws.
I would suggest, and I believe, that it is more in the public interest to allow us voluntarily to phase out over a given number of years and to avoid what will be a substantial economic disruption and chaotic condition in the broadcasting industry than it would be to have a complete phase out immediately. But I would make a suggestion or a counter proposal, and that would be that as far as this antitrust exemption is concerned, make the antitrust exemption across the board so as that the advertising of cigarettes in any media after 1 year could be precluded.
We've not yet heard, however, from the magazine and newspaper publishers, even from those whose publications have lately scored the broadcasters as mercenaries against the public health. Moreover, to avoid the diversion of television cigarette advertising revenues into massive print advertising campaigns, I believe that the magazine and newspaper publishers should now agree at least to maintain current ratios of cigarette to non-cigarette advertising volume.
The broadcasting industry has already agreed on its own to gradually eliminate cigarette advertising by 1973. Senator Moss said he thought that was fine, but he wondered why it should take so long.
This is Walt Corey, one of 30,000 local metropolitan agents. Wherever he goes, he's backed by an army of experts. Highly trained specialists like these. An outstanding lawyer. A distinguished physician. Real estate specialist. A PhD economist. Tax advisor. An eminent actuary. Investment specialist. Computer expert. These are the professionals who help your metropolitan man plan your life insurance more professionally. Though you never really see them, they're a big part of the metropolitan background behind your agent's call. Remember that the next time he calls on you.
The Huntley Brinkley Report continues, brought to you by new Denture Cream, a special denture toothpaste made with the cleaning power denture wearers need. Denture Cream.
Do you soak your dentures clean? You can brush them cleaner with Denture Cream. Look, we soaked that heavy lipstick stain, soaked it all night in a leading tablet cleanser. Even with soaking and vigorous brushing, that denture material is still stained. Now try Denture Cream, the powerful denture toothpaste. In no time, Denture Cream scrubs, brushes, polishes dentures clean, leaves your mouth toothpaste fresh. See the difference? Denture Cream outcleans your soak.
There was racial violence overnight in two cities, Columbus, Ohio, and York, Pennsylvania. In Columbus, a Negro was killed by a white shop owner, and a riot followed in which 40 fires were set, 26 people hurt, and a white man slain by a sniper. The National Guard was called out. In York, National Guardsmen were alerted following 5 nights of violence, during which 49 people have been wounded by gunfire. Last night, a Negro woman was killed by a sniper, and this afternoon, another sniper's bullet critically wounded an elderly white man. In spite of pressure on his legislative program and sporadic outbreaks of racial trouble, President Nixon leaves the country tomorrow. He goes on a trip to the Pacific to see Apollo 11 come down, and then on a goodwill tour through Southeast Asia and Romania. As he leaves, there is evidence he feels he can do so with confidence, because he believes the country is growing conservative and supports his way of governing. A report from contributing editor John Chancellor.
Some of the Nixon men believe that the country is turning conservative in reaction to troubles in the cities, problems with the blacks, the length of people's hair, and a lot of other things. One of these political theorists is a young lawyer named Kevin Phillips. Phillips worked for John Mitchell when Mitchell ran the Nixon campaign, and now Phillips has a desk in the Justice Department. In a book coming out soon called The Emerging Republican Majority, Phillips argues that the old idea of a Democratic South and a Republican North is finished. The Mason-Dixon line, he says, is no longer a political boundary. The important place, says Phillips, is an area in the middle of the country which he calls the heartland. That, plus an area which he calls the Sun Belt, he says is Nixon country, conservative country. Here is Phillips talking about all this with some maps we supplied to illustrate his ideas.
Everybody knows about the division of the North and the South. Schoolboys learn that Maine and Vermont were Republican and Georgia and Mississippi were Democratic. Well, far beyond this, you had the great interior of the United States was divided between parties. Ohio or North Dakota or Iowa, these were Republican states north of the extended Mason-Dixon line. Tennessee, Oklahoma, Arizona, Nevada, these were by and large traditionally Democratic states south of the extended Mason-Dixon line. But they're all part of what I call the heartland, which are the 25 insular states in the country without a seaport or a coastline. The great American heartland of county fairs and wheat and Main Street and all the so-called Protestant ethnic values. And you now have a coming together of the heartland so that the 21 out of the 25 heartland states supported President Nixon in the 1968 election. For the first time, they're forming a bloc in their own right instead of being tails to, in effect, the bodies of parties which are the Northeast or the South in the case of the old Civil War alignments. And this is a major phenomenon. You have a new region which is, in effect, the base of a political party.
Would you describe what you call the Sun Belt?
The Sun Belt is a demographic and political phenomenon which has become extremely important since World War II. It's basically a function of a large migration of the American population and a growth of a technological, middle-class, very mobile culture in states like Florida, Texas, Arizona, Southern California. It's more than those states. It's a whole booming part of the United States, and the predominant characteristic politically is a very conservative outlook. These are the states of Governor Reagan, Senator Murphy, Senator Goldwater, Senator Fannin, Senator Tower, Senator Gurney. These are the states of the new middle-class conservatism. And this is where the greatest population growth in the country is occurring. And the electoral vote strength of these states is steadily growing. And they're overtaking the Northeast. And this is undoubtedly, in my opinion, the area of the United States where the national future is centered demographically and politically.
Why are they conservative?
You have a very, very middle-class culture. It lacks old traditional roots for the most part. It lacks a large concentration of poor and minority groups. It's a semi-frontier Anglo-Saxon middle-class culture. These people believe in the frontier ethic to some extent, the new suburban frontier ethic, do-it-yourself. They tend to dislike welfare. This is the root of a new populist conservatism, which in essence says, don't rock the boat, we don't want radical programs, we don't want great change. And they think that American society is a pretty viable thing. It's certainly worked in these areas. It's produced the most technologically advanced culture in the world.
So, says Kevin Phillips, that's who the Nixon voters are, and that's where they'll be in 1972. He says that the Nixon administration must be conservative enough to take voters away from George Wallace so that the Wallace vote can be contained in the Deep South. Phillips calls that a key secondary consideration for 1972. Phillips also cites figures showing that voters in the big cities are declining in importance. He doesn't think the Republican future lies in the big, decaying cities, but rather in the suburbs and the smaller towns. As for the black voters, Phillips says they may begin using the Democratic Party, in his phrase, the way the Irish used it, to pull themselves up by their own bootstraps. As a Republican, he does not see a place for blacks in his party. Phillips does see a place for lower middle-class whites in the Republican Party and Richard Nixon as their protector against the uncertainties of the times. There are enough of them, he believes, if they are properly handled, to keep the Republicans in office for quite a while.
After 5 days at hard labor, Saturday ought to be the happiest day of the week. But
Saturday sads with Black & Decker lawn and garden power tools. Lightweight electric lawn mowers that start instantly and power through high grass with ease. Lawn edgers that manicure along walks, then turn their heads to trim high grass in hard-to-reach places. And shrub and hedge trimmers that cut any job down to size. Your choice of these is all you need to say goodbye to those Saturday sads. Men who garden with power tools know you can expect the best from Black & Decker.
No more Saturday sads. Black & Decker.
President Nixon awarded American Airlines the Trans-Pacific route from the United States to the South Pacific, New Zealand, and Australia. American will be allowed to fly to these points from the East and Midwest. President Nixon asked Congress to overhaul the Interstate Commerce Commission and give him the authority to appoint a chairman. The chairmanship is now rotated on a yearly basis among the commission members. Prince Juan Carlos of Bourbon was designated today as Generalissimo Franco's successor and as the future King of Spain. Franco nominated the prince in an address to the National Parliament, which ratified the choice by an overwhelming vote. Franco said he would not resign, but would stay on to advise the prince on national problems. David?
It is now speculated that within about one generation, the public will be able to fly to the moon on commercial flights of some kind. The president of one of the big airlines said he would apply to the federal government now for a route to the moon to begin whenever it's feasible. It would be good public relations to do that, forward-looking, progressive, and so on. But there's one thing that stops him from applying for a moon route now, and it's this. At the big city airports these days, traffic delays often run 2 hours and more. The passengers get hot and angry waiting for their planes to leave. So if he applied for a route to the moon now, the passengers would immediately begin shouting and complaining. Here they're talking about flying to the moon when they can't even fly on time to Hawaii. Good night, Chet.
Good night, David, and good night for NBC News.